Summit series. And thank you all for tuning in. We've over 1,100, in fact, tune in from over 20 countries. You're all very welcome, and thanks for joining. We last convened in Dublin at Talent Summit a little under 12 weeks ago, and we explored the theme of the evolving role of the CHRO. And it's probably fair to say that since then, that it's moved from an evolutionary state to somewhat of a revolutionary state, given the crisis that we've been through in recent weeks. And in a recent article, in fact, in The Economist, it drew the conclusion and it drew the parallel between, it compared the CPO function in what it's going through right now through this human crisis, and it compared it to the impact and influence of the CFO as the recovery from the global financial crash got underway. And it asked the question, is this the defining period for the CFO for the decade to come? And to explore that theme and much more, I'm delighted to be joined today by Jane Data, who is the CHRO of NASA, all the way from Virginia, I believe. Jane?
Yes.
Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
Also joined by Mira Migesha, who's a CPO from Just Eat, who's tuning in from London. Welcome, Mira.
Thank you. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, likewise, likewise. And our very own Fiona Mullen, who's the CPO of Ding, tuning in from Dublin. Welcome, Fiona.
Thank you, Robert. Great to be here.
Good to see you guys, and thank you so much for taking time to join us. I might start this. I was looking into some of the NASA's history, Jane, and this is probably my fourth time to collaborate with NASA. And I said it to you earlier, like every time we get the opportunity to engage, like the warmth of the experience and the consistency and the positivity of your people is truly a credit to you. And my experience has always been very, very, very positive. And again, it challenges my thinking continuously. So delighted we get the chance to collaborate once more.
Same here.
Brilliant. And I looked at JFK's his famous moon speech, and there was a quote from it, and I think it's as applicable today as it was back in 1962. So during that famous announcement, JFK said this: "We meet in an hour of change and challenge, in a decade of hope and fear." And he went on, "We choose to go to the moon, not because it's easy, but because it's hard. That goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our knowledge and skills, the most hazardous, dangerous, and greatest adventure on which man has ever embarked." Jane, my opening question to you is, since the outbreak of COVID, how has your team embraced this hazardous, dangerous task during this hour of change and challenge?
Thanks, Robert. Well, there are a lot of things I could share, but let me start with the idea that NASA, all the way back to 1958 when we were founded, has always been a very people-driven agency. Someone came to work for me a few years ago, and when he left, he said, "I came thinking you were a data agency, but you're actually a people agency." And I thought that that really encapsulated so well who we are. And there is this spirit of adventure and taking hard problems. No problem is too hard. And so I think when we entered the COVID era, that same spirit came to bear. But I think that unlike the traditional, okay, what are all the steps that we need to make this mission happen properly? All of a sudden, it kind of got inverted, and it was about how do we actually look after our people, because we are a people agency. And so And I was actually, and a small team from my organization were working with the senior most leadership of the agency from the get-go. And it's because it would be a lot of the issues that we were facing early on were like, we know this is going to affect our people and we don't know quite what it is yet. And it's emerging and changing every day. And what do we do? And so I think that in typical NASA fashion, we said, this is yet again another problem that we will find our way through. We are going to do this. And some of the keys to our success in at least bringing some structure and some good thinking around how to look after our people came from the fact that we took this senior leadership core and we said, we have to figure this out together and we have to figure it out for the whole organization. If we just said, okay, every field center, you're on your own, that would not have worked for so many reasons. And so the voice to the people was highly consistent, not only about the fact that they came first, and I'm talking about not just our civil servants, but also our contractor populations, because it's a blended workforce at NASA. And so we didn't want to feel like somehow it was just all about our civil servants. So when we think about looking after our people writ large, here are the things that we know are important. We established a framework, we worked on policy issues, we had consistent communications all up and down, anything from town halls to written comms, a website where everything is. So these are all sort of just examples of how I think we tackled this in traditional wonderful NASA style, that we actually started with the big picture and then we broke it down into its parts and worked each of the parts, but we kept it really well integrated, like any other system that you work in. And but it was fueled by this sense of passion for looking after our people, which is again sort of how we've started and gone on for all of these decades of our existence. And it's why I work at the agency, because that's how they are.
Jane, tell me, if you look at your function and the team that you lead right now, so are there any particular steps that you or your team have taken that have had a great leap effect on the organization?
Yes. So with respect to COVID, I presume you're asking. Yeah, I think.
For sure.
So I think there were really three things that we did. First of all, I was up there with the leadership. And what that said to the workforce is we matter, because our people organization is there with everyone else. And so it wasn't just engineers and mission people, it was our people, the head of our people office was there. And that's number one. Number two, my team writ large made sort of two primary contributions. One had to do with flexibilities and messaging to the workforce about looking after themselves, balancing work and personal lives. And then as things came down from the Office of Personnel Management, which is our federal government-wide organization that deals with policy things, we sort of took what they gave us and then we extended it out rapidly, and we took as much flexibility as was allowable. So that was important because we wanted to make sure that with schools closed and daycares closed and all of the things that allow people to run their personal lives completely disrupted, that it was really important that we did what we could within the boundaries of law, rule, and regulation to help people deal with, working and looking after their families. So that was one big thing. The other big thing, which I think is something that we will continue on with, it's given us kind of a leg up in working with our supervisors and managers, is that we created a series specifically for them. I've long held the belief that our supervisors they're where the work and the workforce come together. And so helping them help their workforce is as much a contribution as us talking directly to the workforce. And so we put together virtual sessions for them on a whole variety of different topics, and got panels of their peers, and we basically provided an opportunity for them to share across. Of course, we do a lot of collaboration across NASA. That's very much of a hallmark, but we are very field center specific. And so one of the things that was different about this was we were intentionally getting supervisors and managers across the enterprise to actually share with one another in a way that was very important, because it was more crisis. And so, so anyway, that's what I would say are some pivotal things we did.
Well, I spoke to one of your colleagues, Jane, and I asked them their view in terms of the impact of you and your function over the last number of weeks. And the feedback was that the speed, scale, and impact of the communication was as effective, if not the most effective it has ever been in the history of NASA. So again, credit to you and your colleagues.
I'm glad to hear that.
Mira, I'll bring it on to you. Good to see you. Mira, the article I referenced in The Economist, you pointed me towards that as I was knee deep in the Star and Daily Sun. So it was an interesting one to observe and to compare the function of CPO and function of CFO. If I ask you to look at, say, given the magnitude of the kind of people-centered decisions we've been through in recent weeks, how do you feel, say, your function, the HR function? I'm very conscious that it doesn't stand alone, it's not in isolation, and it is very much collaborative. But what do you feel your function, or how has it impacted the organization most beyond the traditional remit of HR?
I think that's a really interesting question, because during various different crises, it's the CFO, and that's basically what the article talks about in terms of during the recessionary period, it was the CFO that came to the forefront of the business. What we have here is, what is the role of people function? And to the point that some organizations are still struggling with what that is, I think this is the forefront of how do we manage our internal workforce that therefore commercially doesn't impact our business as a whole. So how do you set up who we have, what they're doing, how they operate, to the fact that what Jane was just talking about in terms of the world was an array. We haven't got parents who can go to send their children off to school. They're actually having to balance and manage the work alongside the caring responsibilities. And that's just not caring responsibilities for young children, it's also the most vulnerable, who could be your parents. And so how do you create that opportunity to still deliver but provide the flexibility? I remember joining the workforce 20 odd years ago, and one of my first consulting gigs was, we won a piece of work with the CIPD to go, what's the world of smart working? I kind of reflect back 20 odd years later and go, the world hasn't fundamentally shifted in terms of what we mean by smart working. And so COVID has enabled us to kind of go, everybody has to work from home. It's meant that our teams are more connected, which is weird because you're in the office, you're sitting right next to each other. But actually what COVID has enabled us to do is get an insight into people's real life, get to know them at a more human level, because guess what? The little one does pop up onto VC calls when you're on video. And so you can't just go, I'm on a call and shout and shut the door behind you. You actually have to deal with that, which means you're bringing in your real life and who you are, and setting up the organization to kind of deal with that, being able to go, it's okay not to be present. So we had we've been doing weekly surveys, for example, and going, the challenges people are seeing, and it was about presenteeism. So you're away from the office, you're not around your colleagues, and people felt like they needed to be on constantly. So how do you support people through that? People were feeling like all they could do was sit in front of a PC and screen. Going to take coffee breaks, etc., just wasn't happening as much. And if you were having coffee, you were having virtual coffees. So again, it was screen time. And how do you create a connected workforce? By giving them space. And so we did lots of things around mental health. We created, and we have actually, a wellness hub where we were directing people to that, to say, here's some tools, here's some techniques to help you through mental health and mental well-being. Here's some actual classes that we're going to run for you around physical health, so that you are moving, and you are moving away from your desks and away from what you're doing in front of your screen. We've had some resilience people come in and talk about resilience and how you build that. As a people function, we've kind of been at the forefront of how do we help the business through this, but also how do we align it with what we're doing with our partners outside of the people function. So yes, we're internally focused from what we're doing, but also we don't want to have one view of life for our employees and yet treat our partners who are external and our further stakeholders differently. So it's about coming together and a bit like what Jane did, we had senior leaders come together right from the beginning of what is our approach to this across all our stakeholder groups. And we wanted to be as consistent as possible in terms of how we treated all of those guys.
Interesting observation, Mira. And it seems in one way that we've shifted from the employee experience more to the human experience. And the kind of trifecta that I would say that's kind of surfaced in these conversations is the kind of the how interwoven, say, work, family, and societal impact and value has all changed so dramatically. And in many ways, it feels like we're living in a society again, not in an economy, you know?
Absolutely. And I kind of talk about this in terms of, and I'll talk about it from a UK-centric point of view, but London is the hub of lots of city centres. People come together, they come in and they expect to get an amazing coffee. Actually, I want to be able to get an amazing coffee wherever I am. So does this actually impact? And when we go back into the workplace or the workplace opens again, are my expectations and my colleagues' expectations actually different? Do we expect the high street to change as a result of that? Will we actually really enjoy our neighbourhood and where we live? Will that become part of our communities and therefore change society as a whole? Because I still want really great coffee, but I want it more local to where I am. I don't want it as local to where I am when I'm in the office. I just want great coffee everywhere. So are we going to see the community part of that open up as well, and it societally be very different to what we've had for the last 20 odd years?
Interesting. This coffee is terrible, but the bug is good. So anyway, it's Mira, I'll just stick with you for 1 second. I feel I'll come to you in a minute, if I may. You mentioned looking inside and outside of the people function, Mira, and an interesting trend kind of emerged, really accelerated last year, with the appointments of non-executives. So from the HR world, so HR chiefs being appointed as non-executives, and there was a notable appointment at Tesla, and it was the appointment of the global CHRO from Walgreens. And there were probably a number of societal changes and drivers that kind of acted as a catalyst around that trend. But you yourself are a non-executive director on 2 boards, I see. And I'm curious to know where you feel you've impacted those organizations coming from the world of HR or the people world, and reversely, what lessons have you brought back into the people function that you've picked up being a non-executive in those organizations?
So for me, to be in the people function full stop, you need to be commercial. And so we have the traditional function of people, which is let's get the standard contracts out, let's get the paperwork out, let's ensure we're paying our people on time. But actually, I think the world of HR and people has fundamentally shifted. COVID's just an example of how further we can take that and what that could mean. But I think organizations have started to see the value, and every organization I've ever worked for or talked to talks about people being the heart of that business. But what do they really mean by that? And do they really understand what that is? We could have a single challenge over here, which is the same challenge over here, but actually what you need to do to deal and support with that challenge or concern is very different, because us as humans all require different things. And so how does a business approach the same problem, but differently given the context in which it's operating, how the people operate, who they're actually dealing with, and deal with them as a human and as an individual? And so my non-exec roles give me the opportunity to kind of bring in that commerciality, but then add the lens of people. And that's the same as what I come back to my team and say is, it's great to be a great HR professional, but how do you have the lens of the commerciality before you go out and make a suggestion? How do you constantly battle sometimes which one's the right approach? And we have to take tough decisions sometimes because that's the commercial reality of the world in which we live in. But at the same time, what's the humanistic approach, and how do you deal with people at a human level with humility and the care and assistance that you need? And both of those things come together. And I think more and more organizations are going, commercially, yes, we have to achieve and survive and prosper, but at the same time, if we genuinely are true about humans, about people being the center and the heart of our business, how do you make that a reality? And those two things have to come hand in hand.
Like it. And thanks for that insight, Mira. I might just stick with that one piece of the impact of HR leadership. And Fiona, I just see, I think you're on mute there. Thank you. You spoke at the very first iteration of Talent Summit over a decade ago. Looking well. And I remember it very clearly. So first of all, thank you for being there to get it off up and running, and again, it's got a lot of momentum since. So thank you sincerely for that. But back then you were Microsoft, and I know since then you moved into a lot of kind of global roles. You've traveled the world. You landed back in Facebook. You headed up HR for EMEA for Facebook, and then you headed up international HR for Facebook before joining Ding, which, although still very much a purpose-driven or mission-driven organization, is somewhat smaller. What have you noticed around the impact of your role, and how have you found through this crisis, how have your C-level colleagues leaned on you, and how does that collaboration look differently in a smaller organization?
Well, thank you, first of all. It's great to be here. And you're right, I took the plunge into a smaller tech company. I guess I was looking forward to something that was at a different stage for me. And I haven't looked back at all, although many challenges I didn't anticipate, as you could imagine. In some ways, there's a lot of difference, but there's also at the heart a very similar approach. And I love what Mira said around just, people at the heart and also in NASA, to all kind of ultimately technology businesses with very, very diverse applications, but with people very much at the center. I think the thing for me that is the same and has been the case certainly in my career, but very, very particularly over the course of my time at Facebook, is that there is the core of what we do within the HR function, enabling talent and businesses perform through that in whatever form it is, through scale or change, etc. But I think the thing that I have really noticed and has helped me learn has been the kind of uncharted territory, the new ground of challenges that emerge that companies or industries haven't experienced before and that have an impact on people. And it does feel much more frontier-like than the kind of box that HR has been put in over a period of generations in kind of risk mitigation or taking care of, in that the challenges, certainly the challenges that I experienced at Facebook, of one of scale, of newfound responsibilities and impact that a company was having in the world that we never really anticipated, about the engagement that you have when you have 30,000 employees online talking to each other all at the same time on a platform internally, the internal equivalent of Facebook essentially, dealing with Cambridge Analytica, dealing with then now a new crisis, is that you have tools, I have tools, we all have tools in our kit bag around dealing with crisis, but the characteristics of those are very different, and the expectations that people and humans have of their companies now are very, very different. And in fact, the role that we expect of ourselves is very different, and it is human at the center. And so in that sense, it's been very similar at Ding as it's been at Facebook, in that you are first and foremost, you're first and foremost a human, you're secondly a leader, and you're thirdly managing the people function. And all of those things come together in that response. And that's the same at Ding. This was absolutely the same at Facebook. Of course, at Facebook, there's a lot more playbooks, a lot more people to consult with, to go and execute. At Ding, it's okay, we don't have a playbook, let's figure it out and get on with it. And everybody's willing to help and be engaged in the solutioning of it. And look, I think there's, there's lots of positives in that whole experience, and I think we'll get to that discussion. But certainly for me and the people team, I guess, it was a forming of us and how we work with the rest of, the company, and a moment of truth, I guess, and how we really think about ourselves as humans, and a bit of a leveling between everybody that worked for the company.
I love the way you categorize that, the human first, leader second, and HR third. That gives a very clear sense of priority, of, I'm sure it's a good handrail to help navigate difficult decisions and motivation and everything that comes with that. Looking at that transition, Fiona, say from a large organization to a smaller organization, although going through rapid growth and may catch up very soon. Um, if you look at, say, the stakeholder relationship of HR leadership, and if you look at the visibility, I suppose, if I zoom that back to the last global financial crash for the CFO, so all of a sudden they became much more visible to shareholders, their societal impacts became part of their remit and their portfolio, and the visibility certainly increased. How do you see that piece play out over the course of this recovery, Fiona?
Well, I think it's going to be really interesting to use that cliche. But I think it is about accelerating a change that was already occurring, and perhaps more acutely in the technology industry. But I'd point to, issues of diversity and the obligations that employers have now, and certainly the employee demands on companies in issues of equality, on where we stand on social issues and sometimes on political issues. And certainly in a company like Facebook, those demands were very high. And so the people function and me and others were hugely accountable for the behaviors, and the perceived behaviors that the company was taking at a point in time. I've got a weird point to make, but I'll make it, which is, there are our peers who have been fired over recent years for issues that have emerged, either that haven't been taken care of appropriately, largely issues of equality and diversity and ethics, or that were kind of tried to be sorted, not sorted, or indeed ignored. And whilst that's really uncomfortable, for those individuals and for those companies, actually there's a really good aspect of that, which is a level of accountability, that our function is seen as the custodian of the culture and the behaviors of companies, to the employee base. And so, historically we have struggled, I suppose, as a function to play that commercial role, influence the performance of our business through people and capability, etc. And we've definitely moved into the right seat at the table now, again, to use another cliche. But the next frontier is actually looking at our employee base in the same way, and our perhaps even customers. So if you think about our employees in the same way as a CFO might think of shareholders, and you think about culture as the mirror of the external brand, and that matches, I guess, consumer behaviors, the CPO, the CHRO, plays a hugely important and visible role as the custodian of that. And I think there's a journey towards that, but the crisis that we have in our laps right now, I think, will accelerate that progression for all companies. And I think it's a very bad thing that's happened. I think it's a very good thing that lots of companies have acted really well. And that door is opened, I think, for our function across industries and markets to lead. But I do think it's an acceleration of a trend that was already in place, somewhat started probably from the last financial crisis.
Interesting. I throw this question out to the floor, and I want to stay with that kind of comparison. And again, if we harpoon back to that last financial crisis, the overcorrection that happened in the finance world immediately afterwards around, say, austerity, regulation. Do you think there's a fear, Jane, I'll come to you. Do you think there's a fear and a risk that we overcorrect as people leaders and we somewhat get it wrong, or we we prevent the flexibility and agility that we believe we've captured over the last couple of weeks?
Of course, there's always a risk that that will happen, but I do believe that the transition back to, we call it normal operations, but sort of things that are closely resemble what we had before is going to be slow and difficult. And so I think the one thing that will keep us honest about not overcorrecting is paying attention to learning how, like for us, you know, we basically said, hey, 90% of you're teleworking. And so, but there is mission work that can only be done on site, testing and all sorts of hardware kind of related work that you really can't do from your home. And so now we're in a moment where we're going to start adding back very slowly and gradually on-site work that allows for the mission work that has otherwise been on hold because we haven't been on site to go ahead and proceed. And so I think that we have intentionally gone at this slowly so that myself for the people business and the other members of the leadership team can actually figure out what's working and what's not. And so I think there is a risk that we will be maybe over conservative, but I also believe that that we have actually built in learning, if that makes sense. So, and that's the best way, because we simply don't know how this is going to unfold between all of the medical uncertainties and, you know, how the communities around all of our facilities are going to actually decide to open or reopen or shut back down again. I mean, there's just a lot of variables at play here. And so I think that I am reminded of how very puzzling it was at the very start when we were going the other direction, and how you sort of like every day you just had to sort of listen and learn and then decide what the right thing was to do. It just wasn't clear. I think it's going to be actually even more difficult on the way back, and I think it's going to last longer. And so I think there is a risk of overcorrection. Maybe we don't go back as fast as we should have, could have, but as long as we are really paying attention, and it's not just me and the people business, but it's all the aspects of the business in this core team to make the trades, the risk trades, if you will, I think that's the best that we can hope for in navigating this total uncertainty, really. So.
And I hope, Jane, that we protect what we've gained throughout this great rediscovery. And I think that's a really vital thing. And I think we as talent leaders, by and large, need to create and provide the oxygen for that conversation to continue way beyond recovery, because eating bread is soon forgotten, and we'll get to a point of the new normal and it'll be business as usual. And I think that's something that we need to kind of champion over the next decade. Yeah, love
I
it.
absolutely agree. We're already talking about how we change the way we do business in some areas. Like telework is a great example. We've always been teleworking. I mean, we were on the forefront of government agencies getting out, experimenting with telework. But I will tell you that a lot of people didn't, and didn't want to, or did it very sporadically. And I think now, with such a long experience with telework, now we have people more accustomed to what that feels like. And I think there are a lot of advantages of us having more telework. And so my job in part is to figure out how I can continue some of those practices for the benefit of the agency, but most especially the people. So yes.
Jane, I'd love the view from the ground from your people. So from that handful of people working up in the International Space Station, banging on the window, saying, "Oh, this is great teleworking. We're miles away, but we've been plugged out for so long, you know." So you win the most remote workforce in the world, Jane.
Right, teleworking on planet and off. That's the way we talk about it.
Love it, love it. Mira, Fiona, I'll come back to you in a second. Stephen Quinn, welcome.
How are you? Sorry,
Good to see you. All right. So each week, guys, we bring in a view from the ground. And Fiona, you mentioned culture, and I'm just reminded of some of the work that Stephen and his team do at Jobio. So Stephen is CEO of Jobio, an employer branding and talent attraction platform, and you've a network of media partners around the world, Stephen, with like News Corp and VentureBeat. I'm keen to get the view on the ground, say from your 2 million plus, say, job seekers across your platforms, and also from the employers that you're working with in recent weeks and days, Stephen.
Yeah, so thanks for having me, Robert. You should work for me with that sales pitch. Thanks, Emil. Um, the,
I want to work with NASA.
yeah. So do I. So yeah, so the way I look at this, I always look for the customers, right? Because we're an enabler, right? So we're a technology platform that sits in between the corporate and the talent, right? And we would create a lot of employer branding content for global brands, the Slacks and Airbnbs and these kind of people. But interestingly, clearly that business is waned because there's no one in offices to interview. There's no talking heads people to interview to market various roles and brands, etc. So we're seeing a lot of what we're seeing a lot of is the need for internal content, right? So a lot of inbound interest in trying to figure out how to communicate to the people you have, and more importantly, how to champion what you already do, rather than the external view of this, right? So, and interestingly, even is how to make people feel safe about coming back to work, because going back to work is clearly, even the families of the people who are going back to work are anxious, right? So it's basically how corporates are managing the get back to work, how it's going to be, what it's going to be like in the office, how are we telling our staff about it, what is the new normal when I get back there, and should I, when I have to explain to my wife or husband later, am I going to be able to responsibly say that it's going to be a safe environment to be, etc. Right? So we're seeing a lot of that coming in from a corporate level. Now, obviously, from a talent perspective, it's really interesting. All the engagement around our emails is up considerably. People are, obviously, that's to do with the fact that a lot of people find themselves, unfortunately, unemployed. Now they're beginning to think about what they would really like to do in life, and are looking deeply into brands to figure out, actually, have I been doing the right thing all along? Is there a company out there that suits me better? What type of company do I want to work for and not just have to work for? So these are the things that the talent are trying to figure out. We see an absolute increase in about 75% of people are now looking online for your employer brand before applying at all, right? So it's actually too late to be talking about employer branding on your application page. You need to be touching people out in where they are in the world every day, right? Reading online, etc. But also clearly the remote work, all of the job listings that have anything to do with remote work, working from home, flexibility, all the things that are now probably were becoming more important to people before this, but this just has accelerated it, right? So culture, mission, people, these are things that were becoming more important than flashy offices and remuneration and holidays, right? But this pandemic has really accelerated that process overnight, right? And is now the most important thing to people is, am I going to get the flexibility? I actually like working from home. I like being empowered and trusted. Where can I find that? And those are the things that we're seeing.
Very good, very good. Stephen, I'll leave you run. Thanks for that insight, and good health to you and the team in the meantime.
Thanks, Emil. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks, Stephen. Mira, I'll come to you. I'm just the building blocks from what Stephen said there around culture and around the workforce. So you've over 3,500 employees around the globe, and I know you guys work with a big third-party contingent, and a lot of those are gig workers, I suppose. Um, I'm curious to know, right? So the one thing that really jumped out at me in recent weeks is the value of work and the definition of, say, delivery drivers or cyclists from being um, from being precarious to now being essential. I've been fascinated by that transition in recent weeks. Um, do you think that's a short-term kind of switch in value, or do you think that's here to stay?
Personally, I hope it's here to stay because it's empowering. It's empowering to see the value that the whole society has placed on what was previously deemed as low skill or regarded as the lower end of the labour force. And actually, these people have risked themselves, have risked their health in order to ensure that the deliveries can be made to those who are more vulnerable, and people can still get the items that they still require. So personally, I'm hoping that society will think about drivers, school teachers, nurses, doctors, etc., with a different view. I've got family and friends who've been homeschooling, as I'm sure most people have at the moment, and there's a whole campaign about actually should we be paying our school teachers more, because they've realised how difficult with their own children it is to keep them in a structured environment to get them learning. And actually you have teachers who are doing this on a more regular basis every day, in fact, with plenty of children, and trying to maintain some discipline and structure around their school day. And genuinely, that applies to all walks of society. I'm fascinated to hopefully see this momentum continue and go, actually, we need to have a different view of who adds value, because each person and each individual, again, going back to the human element, plays a different role in the whole of society. And each person adds value in different ways. And if everybody added value up here in terms of the strategic high earners, then we wouldn't have a combined society that makes up what we actually need. So you need that flexible resource, you need that flexibility, you need people who are going to be doing the delivery driving, are going to be the nurses, are going to be doctors, but it should be a fair wage across the board for all.
Very good. And personally, I've found the homeschooling thing being a big motivation to actually go into the office and work. It's
Absolutely.
it's funny the fringe benefits we see. Fiona, I'll come to you. This forced dislocation, it happened very quickly, and by and large was done with a real light touch kind of consultation. And on one side, kind of shows how we can mobilize at scale and at pace. If we look now at the kind of the reconvening and the reconnection of our workforce into a kind of a low touch economy, it's likely to be phased and to happen on a slower footing. Do you think we have a window where this renewed willingness to change is strongest? And do you think we can leverage that momentum in the short term to benefit our people and our organization in the medium term?
I mean, I sound like Jane and Mira, like I'm an optimist here because I think it's the only game in town right now. And I don't know if anybody's seen, there's a lovely graph that our friends in Deloitte use, and it has the kind of evolution of technology over a period of time. It's very simple, and it shows, relatively speaking, the ability of different cohorts to change. And for me, it explained why organizationally we're really bad at it. Which is essentially, you know, the people who change most easily are humans, individuals, and those that change most slowly are the kind of the structures. It's the laws and governments and policies, and somewhere in between you get, you know, businesses of various different kind of types. And the challenge that we all face is that we think about organizational solutions for the kind of problems that or opportunities that we're talking about here. But actually, I think the solution to this, because humans at an individual level can respond to change much faster than organizations can, is to really put more of this in their hands and kind of speak to their individual needs rather than the kind of average or the structures. Because I think in doing that, A, we'll be slow, and B, we just won't get it right because we'll be trying to solve for all things for all people, so to speak. And I think what was good about, albeit in a very bad context, about this change is that we kind of said to everybody, you do what's right for you and your family, whether you're, you know, an employee, but actually you're a human, you're a parent, you're a son or a daughter, you're a carer, you're a neighbor. Put that first and then put all the other stuff second, and then you'll figure it out and you tell us what you need to figure it out. So that to me is where the solution to your question lies. Obviously, I don't have all the answers, but things that I'm thinking about are, you know, I do think the workplace has changed, but again, I think that's expediting a process that was already begun. To the point that Mira and Jane have already mentioned, you know, work is not a place you go, it's a thing that you do, and it's the people you do it with, and how we're going to operate in the future will be different because of what we've experienced. And so I think, you know, the physical workplace you could see as being much more of a, you know, it's the coffee shop, it's the place to go and do things, but it's not necessarily the place you go to do your work. The time over which you do it, the 9 to 5, like, I think we've blown that out of the water. Maybe the 5-day week, like that is kind of something to think about as to what the right solution there is. I was, you know, an old colleague of mine at Facebook posted on LinkedIn there about a week ago that his wife had been, his role had been terminated at Airbnb. And I don't know if you saw, but she'd posted a request to LinkedIn to offer a different location option, because right now it was all about you to pick your location. And she said, please pick remote, because right now I'm a person for hire and I'll work for anybody. And given we're all at home, it doesn't really matter. And I thought, oh gosh, that's, you know, simple, but that's an illustration of, you know, one person with one need that will have pretty widespread application. And if you're an employer, suddenly you're now looking at, you know, we've all talked about global workforces in the past and opening offices and how we acquire the world's best talent, but actually in some ways this is the biggest opportunity to connect with the world's best talent.
Interesting, Fiona.
Yeah.
That's just on that very point. So this is what I've been fascinated with at NASA for a period of time, and I think there's a lesson for all of us in this. And when I look at your organization, Jane, and if I look, say, 20 years ago, you guys had the monopoly on space exploration. You were the agency, and then you had private sector entrants. So you had Blue Origin, you had Virgin Galactic, and SpaceX. So all in very, very short space of time. So then there's a race for talent, from poaching talent from you, and looking at that that competition and the shift that's happened over 20 years. I now see next week you have the first human space launch from US soil in the last 10 years, and you're doing it in collaboration with SpaceX. So your ability, excuse the expression, to pivot from competing to collaborating, and what that means to your talent supply chain, I think is fascinating. And I think there's something in that Fiona has raised around this new sense that we have access to global supply chain of talent. What have your observations been that has enabled that level of collaboration with your competition, Jane?
Well, thanks for the question. And I could probably talk for 3 hours on this, but so let me condense it to a few key
Put you in 3 minutes, go on.
There we go. So, you know, there was a policy change some years back around really building the human space flight, particularly, but the business space. And so that we were moving from, we've always had partners, industrial partners, always, but it was more, I give you a contract and some requirements, and then you give me back what I've asked for. And that was sort of a little bit more the nature of the relationship. The nature of the relationship with our commercial partners is very different. They are actual partners. They bring resources to bear. And the idea here is that we are actually getting them prepared to be able to do work that we would traditionally have done ourselves. And so, you know, this commercial crew and cargo program that started, you know, a handful of years ago, and of which the launch is the first with crew on it that we've had since we began that program, is an incredible milestone in NASA's history. So I can't emphasize that enough, because you're right, this is not just a NASA vehicle, but it is a vehicle that was developed by SpaceX in partnership with us, so that our role had changed. Now, I think that there's more of that to come as we go back to the moon and on beyond to that to Mars, and that it's going to be much more of a combined, you know, commercial, industrial, and NASA. And so what it's required of us is a certain kind of flexibility, that we really redefining the nature of collaboration. And I can't tell you that we were able to turn a switch and do that quickly. I think that it's still more something of an evolution for us to really, you know, change what we see as our work and enable our partners to be able to do it. So that's really the nature of the collaboration. From a human capital perspective, one of the things that we have been doing is trying to shift the culture of NASA a little bit to help support this in this evolution. And the way, you know, NASA is people are fiercely loyal to NASA. So we tend to have people who stay for 25 or 30 years. And so we are an older population, very long-term serving. We call them the NASA family, just to give you an idea of that. And so because of that, the personnel that we have at the agency tends to be a little bit more static over time. Our attrition rates are typically 3 or 4% a year. It's not very much. And so as the world around us is changing and all of these new entrants are getting to be more sophisticated in their knowledge about how to do this, we still have the population that we have. And so we've been talking on a human capital basis about having what we call a porous border to NASA. So this idea that rather than you come and you stay and then you're a part of the family and we never let you go, is this idea of project-based employment and having people go work for Blue Origin, come back, go again, go work for SpaceX. But this idea of coming back and forth between, industry and or commercial companies and NASA is really healthy. It's part of a growing ecosystem, essentially. And so recognizing the ecosystem that's around us and doing things that are they're very, personnel related, but which are supposed to be supporting this notion that you don't have to have a whole career at NASA, but wouldn't it be great if you understood all of those different kinds of perspectives? So
interesting, really, really interesting, Jane. And you mentioned, you opened your answer with the word policy, and I think what policy does is it simply gives us permission. It simply gives us permission. And if I look at, say, some of the commentary and discussion we had around the overcorrection piece from 10 years ago, I think there's something in that we could create the space through giving permission to think radically different around how we look at work type, workforce, workplace, as you mentioned, Fiona. And I think there's something within our gift to allow and to, as I say, to give that permission to your organization. The other observation I have, just again, dealing with some of your colleagues and collaborating with you guys for some time, is the mission, not about being mission driven. I think your enduring mission has probably allowed you to operate beyond the fringes of what's commercially viable. So I think it's quite unique to you guys, and there's some interesting insights in that. And you yourself described as the feeling internally shifted from being mission-driven to people-driven over the course of weeks, which is again, I think we need another hour to talk about that. Mission values, Mira, I want to bring it to you. I know you guys are also very mission-driven, and I actually read an article yesterday. It wasn't in The Economist; it was actually in the Mirror, and it was a piece on Ding, right? Sorry, a piece on you guys. Just Eat. So Food Cycle, this charity that provides meals to the impoverished and people who are isolated. So people convene in these big centres to get a hot meal, and it was stopped because of the social distancing. And it was Just Eat who stepped in to help with the delivery and the continuity of that charity. And I'm also aware of the work that you've done with all the different restaurants and takeaways where you guys have offered and created. I think it's somewhere in the region of 1.5 million worth of services to the NHS workers. And I know that runs deep with you. Can I ask your observation over the course? Like, it's an unusual question. Over the last couple of weeks, Mira, and I know you have a very strong value set, what value has been tested most and what you observe of that testing?
That's a really interesting question, because as a business, and again, I should reiterate that we've done lots of work. So when we set up the program around how we're going to approach this pandemic, we were clear that we had different stakeholder groups that we needed to support and address through the challenge. We had employees, we had restaurant partners, we had our courier network, and we had those key workers alongside customers, etc. And so we were very clear that we needed an approach that supported the most vulnerable in our category and our stakeholder group. So for us, it was really important to ensure that we continued being that partnership, not just being that partner during times of positivity. We needed to be there throughout that relationship, because that's what stands us in good stead for any future conversations, etc. And so we ensured that our approach to COVID was supported across the entire org, which is why it wasn't just me as a people function going, this is what we're going to do for our employees and this is all we're going to do, because it's about who we have today. So a bit like both Fiona and Jane talked about, we're treating everyone as independent individuals with different needs and helping and supporting them. So yes, we had packages available for our restaurant partners. We provided support for couriers that would go against the gig model, for example, because that's the right thing to do. And we didn't just do that in the UK. We created an approach and a framework that then we were able to deploy in each of our markets. So yes, in the UK, we supported Food Cycle, but in some of our other countries, we've supported local agencies, local charities that needed the support at the right time. So in Italy, we did hospitals rather than a charity, but we also did the equivalent of a Food Cycle charity as well. So,
and how would you describe the vibe or the mood music in the business recently, Mira?
It's balanced because we've got this pandemic. We want to support the stakeholder groups through that. We're taking our employees on a journey. We understand that the world of work is going to look different. We potentially understand that customer preferences are going to change. What does that look like? And at the same time, we've still got the pandemic to go, well, actually, what does it look like? How do we come out of this as a bigger society? And what does that look like? So as an organization, we're positive, but at the same time, we're cautious in terms of we need to do the right thing and continue to support as we go forward.
Well said. Well said. Fiona, thanks for coming back. You mentioned three constructs in how you view your role: human, leader, HR. Could I just pick you up on the leadership piece, please? Do you think there are any emerging competencies that we need to consider, both for ourselves and also in how we look to mold ability, competency, and skill of our leadership peers for a more robust recovery? Do we need a new skill set of leadership, do you think?
I think, again, at the risk of repeating myself, I think it is expediting the need for something that was already emerging, which is ultimately, you could call it EQ, you could call it connection. It is being much more human-centric leadership. Ability to be vulnerable, ability to be open. These are human skills that typically they have not been viewed as being professional skills. There's obviously lots, over the last number of years about this, but I think this moment has, I guess, ripped the plaster off from my perspective, because, we can all tell the leaders, whether they be political world leaders, business leaders, those that are authentic, invested, prepared to make the tough decisions, the human decisions, prepared to talk about the difficulty and the inherent tensions in potentially getting things wrong, maybe getting them wrong and then having to explain them, like just the real life challenges of the moment that we're in. And leaders who are doing best in that moment are those that are not trying to be something that they're not, that they're actually bringing their true selves into their communications with their organizations and their employees and their shareholders and their stakeholders, whoever they may be, or their citizens, in my view, at least. And I think that is the big ask. I think, the newer generation of leaders start with that anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
That's well said. You remind me of two things. One is actually another life lesson with NASA around assuming positive intent. I think it's a very powerful thing. And if you couple that with vulnerability that you opened your description with, and you mentioned the word citizen, you remind me of a discussion we had with Margaret Heffernan, and she used the example of the Citizens' Assembly in Ireland, where they effectively crowdsourced opinion on a very political or a hot political issue to bypass political impasse. And the outcome of that was that the wide spectrum of views of people on the ground who this would impact most, that created the robustness in the process of decision making and gave it legitimacy. So those who didn't believe in it respected it because the process was open, transparent, and it involved a wide spectrum of people. And I think there's a valuable lesson in both of those and everything you've just described, Fiona, so eloquently for all of us. I have one final question, and I'll open it up to each of you if you don't mind. I opened this conversation with that famous quote from JFK, and I'll finish with that. He mentioned a decade of hope and fear. What's each of your hopes, or what do you hope we retain from this crisis? And what do each of you fear we may lose in the decade ahead? Jane?
So I hope that we retain, I guess it would be obvious based on everything that we have all said, the people focus. So for instance, I really hope that we pay attention to people we're selecting for supervisory and managerial roles. Are they really good people leaders? Are we paying attention? Because in the end, not all the answers will ever be available from some one source. We have to have people who have judgment and who can retain that. So I'm hopeful that we will do that, and that that has taught us a lot of lessons about what it means to manage people and manage work. My only fear is that I think that we don't really have a good read on overall resilience. I think we have generally a very resilient workforce, but we have thrown so many things at our people, from keeping the work going 24/7 to looking after their folks, and that we will lose some of that, or at least temporarily a little bit of the optimism through sheer fatigue. And are we really doing enough to then make that point?
Keep on assuming positive intent, Jane. And good luck to you and your team next week. Mira?
Thank you.
I think in terms of positivity, and what I'm hopeful for is that we take the lessons that we've learned as a result of this pandemic and we apply it. So I would hope that since working and doing that piece of research with the CIPD, actually we can fundamentally change what the workplace looks like, and that would be awesome. My fear is almost the opposite of that, which is we treat everyone the same. So we believe that everybody wants to work from home, because that's not true. There are some people that this situation, working from home in isolation, just does not work for them. It causes more anxiety, it causes more stress, it causes more pressure. And so I'm hopeful we won't treat everybody the same and expect everybody that the new world of work is remote working, because that won't work for everyone. So my fear is that we treat and decide that the world of work is very different and is right for everyone.
Well said, Mira. Mira, good luck and good health, and keep up the good work. And to you and the team. Fiona?
My hope is that I think the moment has proven that we are all interconnected globally, business-wise, socially, interest-wise. There's a lot more that connects us than divides us, and that's very true from the point of view of opportunity, development, social connection, and there's also dynamic of being intensely local, so that you can be part of this global world and global opportunity, and also be very local to your community and be connected to the immense opportunities that exist for us. The risk of that, though, is our responses are often very, by country, and whether that will push us back to very localized focus on things, more politicized focus on things. And I think that would send the world backwards and send business and the workplace backwards. But we're all in industries and organizations that take a very global view, and beyond global even in one case. So I'll go back to being an optimist. It's a fear, but I'm going to be optimistic about it.
Universal globalism ahead of nationalism. I love it. To each of you, I hope the coming decade serves to organize and measure the best of you, your people, and as hazardous and as challenging as this might be, I truly hope it's an adventure. Thank you all for joining us. For each of you, thank you guys. For everyone else for tuning in, with 1,070 people register for the series. So thank you so much for taking the time to join us. We're back next week for a second installment of our collaboration with NASA, and delighted to be joined by Bob Gibbs, who's the Associate Administrator of Mission Support, Heath Slaughter from Simon Sinek Inc., and former Irish rugby captain Rory Best. We plan to convene through a virtual roundtable to give you your say. So if you choose, or if you have an interest in participating, please type Y into the comment box in the right hand side of the screen, and we'll be in touch to organise. Until then, keep well. Thanks.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.